In the quiet village square on a market day, stalls were set up under the bare winter trees. The air was cold and crisp, carrying whispers of the approaching season's end. Amongst the bustling crowd, there stood an old wooden bridge over a small stream that trickled beneath, frozen at its edges. A widow with weathered hands moved through the square, her basket full but her steps unhurried. Near the bridge, she found herself drawn to the sound of water and wood creaking against each other. She paused by the bridge's edge where a young carpenter was fixing planks with hammer and nails. He wore a worn coat, his hands moving steadily despite the chill that could be seen in his eyes. The widow offered him an apple from her basket without saying much. The carpenter stopped to take it, nodding thanks. She watched as he bit into the fruit, its color bright against his pale fingers. "Cold work," she said finally. He nodded again, teeth brushing cold air between words. "It's good." She glanced at the stream, now quieter than ever. "How long have you been here?" "Since morning." He finished the apple and tossed the core into a pile of scraps beside him. The widow looked back to her basket, noticing how the cloth had grown damp from being in the snow. She started rearranging vegetables with deliberate care. "You must be tired," she remarked softly, finding herself talking now as though easing an old muscle that hadn't been used for some time. "Not really." He wiped his hands on a rag and offered her a smile. "It's satisfying." She turned to him then, the sun breaking through clouds briefly, casting light across the bridge and onto them both. There was something in his gaze that made her feel a quiet kindredness. "What do you fix next?" she asked. "The bridge needs some work on its center beam," he replied, motioning with his hammer towards the middle plank which creaked slightly under foot traffic from market-goers crossing back and forth. She nodded, understanding the gravity of his task. "It'll take time." "Yes." He picked up a length of wood from beside him. "But it's important to get right." The widow stepped closer, reaching for her needle and thread from within her coat pocket without thinking. She took hold of one of the broken threads on the bridge's side. "Mind if I help?" she asked quietly. He looked at her hand, then up to meet her eyes, a question lingering there. "Sure," he said after a moment. Together they worked in silence for some time, the widow holding nails steady while he hammered them into place. The sound of metal against wood echoed softly along the stream, mingling with its gentle murmur. When she finished sewing up the threads and tying off the knots neatly, her fingers were numb but clean. She leaned back on her heels to admire their joint effort, seeing how it strengthened one side of the bridge enough for sturdy passage now. The carpenter turned around, looking pleased too. "Thanks," he said sincerely. She smiled at him warmly before gathering her basket and rising. The market was winding down as she left the square, her steps lighter than when she had come in. As the crowd thinned out, a gust of wind lifted fallen leaves into the air around them. They circled and spun until settling finally on the bridge's edge where the widow paused to leave an apple core for the birds that might visit later in the day. The sound of her footsteps faded as she walked away back towards home through winter's quiet embrace, leaving behind a small moment shared under old trees by a wooden bridge.
You're listening to the Empty Teahouse. Somewhere across the river, a dog barked into the dark. Under a clear sky dotted with lazy clouds, an old woman and a young girl stood side by side.
Under a clear sky dotted with lazy clouds, an old woman and a young girl stood side by side in the narrow valley, where the hills pressed close around them. The late summer's sun hung low, casting long shadows from the few trees still holding onto their leaves. It was quiet here, away from the village's chatter. The old woman held out her hands to the girl, palms upturned. "Look at this," she said softly, showing the young fingers a handful of small stones, each one smooth and worn by water's touch. The girl bent closer, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Pick one you like," the woman invited. She watched as the child chose a stone, holding it close to examine the curve where rain had smoothed it over time. "Why that one?" she asked gently. "It reminds me of your eyes," the girl replied, looking up at the old woman who smiled but said nothing more. Instead, they walked together toward a small stream winding through the valley floor, water clear and cool underfoot. They sat on the bank for a while, listening to the currents whisper against stones. "See how it goes around each rock?" she asked without looking up from the water flowing by. "It finds its own path." Hours passed in this manner, the two moving quietly through the landscape, pausing when they found beauty or interest. They climbed an incline covered with wildflowers, their fragrant scent mingling with earth and pine needles. At one point, the old woman handed over a worn leather-bound notebook to the girl. "Write what you see," she said simply. The girl took it hesitantly at first but soon wrote down lines of poetry that caught her breath. A breeze came up then, light enough only to ruffle leaves and hair. It brought with it the scent of herbs drying in a nearby field, sage and rosemary. As they walked back toward where their footpath met the road leading out of the valley, the old woman stopped once more. She handed the girl something wrapped tightly within an old tea towel. Curious, the girl unwrapped it to find a small wooden box, its surface carved with intricate patterns that told stories of family and community. "This belonged to my grandmother," she explained as if reading the girl's thoughts. "Now it's yours." They came to where their paths would diverge, at a bend in the road beneath an ancient oak tree heavy with autumn leaves. Without speaking, they hugged briefly before parting ways. The old woman waved until the girl turned a corner and was out of sight. On her way back through the fields, she stepped carefully around clumps of wild grass standing tall and golden against fading light. A crow called softly from the edge of a field as if in agreement with something no one else could hear. She felt its presence more than saw it, and then it was gone again into thicker shadows. Later that evening, under candlelight at her simple table, she opened the box to find inside several small stones identical to those they had collected together during their day out. Each one a reminder of a silent agreement made long ago, handed down now through time and generations.
The lantern flame swayed once, then steadied again. In the quiet hour just before dawn, as the city slept and the sky was a soft gray canvas.
In the quiet hour just before dawn, as the city slept and the sky was a soft gray canvas, a returning soldier approached a small roadside shrine. He had left this place years ago with his chest puffed out in pride and uniformed confidence, but now he walked alone, his shoulders slumped under the weight of what time had taught him. The shrine sat on an old tree stump, framed by weather-beaten lanterns that flickered weakly in the cold morning air. The soldier stopped to bow before it, placing a small wooden statue of a crane next to offerings left by others. Coins and flowers faded with rain. He lingered there for what felt like hours, but was only minutes. A woman's silhouette emerged from behind the shrine as the sky began to lighten. She walked with a quiet dignity that belied her years of labor in the clay hills, where her hands had molded pots and cups before setting them out under the sun's watchful eye. Her eyes met his briefly before she looked down at her muddy hands. The soldier noticed her fingers, calloused yet graceful, and thought about all the times he might have helped someone like this woman. But now it was too late for such thoughts. He had no gifts to offer beyond an acknowledgement of shared experience. He nodded toward her and offered his hand, palm up, as if to say, "Let us share." She took a clean rag from her pocket and began washing her hands under the water dripping from the shrine's roof gutter, holding out the cloth for him to take when she was done. Their eyes met again, but there were no words needed. He dipped his fingers into the cold runoff, using the cloth to cleanse them as well. When both had finished, he handed back the rag without saying thank you. and she nodded once in return. She stepped aside to let him pass, her presence a silent reminder of all that could not be said or undone. The soldier continued on his way, leaving behind the lantern's glow for the rising sun. The woman watched until he disappeared around a bend in the road. Then she turned back to the shrine and placed 2 small stones at its base, white ones for peace, black ones for balance. She walked away into her day, the sky now fully awake above her head, each step lighter than before.
The lantern flame swayed once, then steadied again. The wooden bridge over the small stream had seen better days. It was midwinter and the planks were ice cold underfoot.
The wooden bridge over the small stream had seen better days. It was midwinter and the planks were ice cold underfoot. Above, branches of birch trees crisscrossed, letting only thin slivers of sunlight through to the water below where a duck floated, unmoving. Eli approached slowly, his boots crunching on frost-covered ground. He reached out tentatively as he stepped onto the first plank and then another, testing each before committing full weight. Halfway across, an old man in worn clothes appeared beside him, shuffling with difficulty but making no sound save for the cold creak of wood. Eli glanced sideways, then returned his gaze to the far bank where trees lined the path. He moved faster now that he had company, although there was little room to hurry on a narrow bridge. The old man waited until they were both across and paused, resting against the stone pillar at the base. "You're in a rush," he said without turning around. His voice was calm, soft. Eli stopped too but kept his hands clasped behind him, looking down as if searching for something lost. "I've got someplace to be." The old man nodded, eyes closed briefly as if listening to the stream. He opened them again and looked up at Eli with a faint smile. "We all do." Without another word, he shuffled towards the trees on his side of the bridge. Eli watched him go for a moment before continuing, slower this time, feeling the ice crack underfoot but moving forward steadily, one foot after another. When Eli reached his destination, a small cottage with smoke curling from its chimney, he pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was warm, filled with familiar scents of earth and wood smoke. A woman sat by the fire turning a spool in her hands. She looked up at him and smiled, setting down the tool to embrace him warmly. Eli held her close for a long moment, breathing deeply of her scent. Then he pulled away gently, straightened his shoulders, and picked up a wooden bowl from where it rested on the table. Outside, winter wind sighed through empty branches as evening fell early over the bridge and the surrounding forest.
The bowl felt heavy in his hand as he traced the grain of the wood. In the quiet corner of a bamboo grove that had just seen rain.
In the quiet corner of a bamboo grove that had just seen rain, 2 old friends sat beneath a wide-leaved tree. The droplets clung to each branch, hanging in delicate suspension until they fell in tiny arcs upon the damp earth below. There was no chatter as they shared the space, only an occasional rustle from above or the soft squelch of boots on wet soil. Eli had come back after years away, seeking out his old friend Lynn, who still lived here among the bamboo shoots and distant mountains. They spoke little, their hands busy with simple tasks, Lynn arranging fallen leaves into a neat pile at his feet while Eli tried to mend a torn fishing net, an attempt more symbolic than practical. The air was cool and smelled of wet earth and budding flowers that poked out from beneath the leaves, waiting for spring's official welcome. Lynn glanced up from his work with a small smile, offering Eli a cup of tea made from wild mint growing nearby. It was steeped lightly, just enough to warm without overwhelming. Eli took it slowly, savoring each sip as if tasting years rather than mere moments. The leaves outside the grove rustled again, this time carrying with them the first notes of dawn's light breaking through gray clouds. Lynn rose silently and moved toward a small hut nearby, returning with a length of rope and 2 wooden stakes. "Found these on one of my walks," he said, placing them beside Eli. thought you might need them." Eli nodded, understanding that this was his cue to go back to the coast where nets were more practical than leaves. He stood up slowly, feeling the cold ground seep into his bones, and knew it would take time for warmth to return. Lin handed over a small bag containing some dried mushrooms and rice cakes he'd made himself. "These will see you through until next year," Lin said quietly. Eli looked down at the gift but did not reach out to accept it right away. His hands were still moving, trying to repair what no longer needed fixing. Then finally, with a small nod, he took the bag and let his fingers trace its rough weave once before placing it in his pocket. The bamboo grove was becoming a blur of green as Eli prepared to leave, each step toward the path more deliberate than hurried. Lin watched silently from under the wide-leafed tree, his eyes following Eli's progress until he disappeared behind another row of tall stalks. Only then did Lin return to arranging leaves and contemplating their fleeting beauty amidst an endless cycle of growth and decay, much like the tides that had called Eli back only to send him on again.
The last leaf to fall from the tree was the smallest, circling gently before resting on Lin's outstretched palm. A day begins and ends with whispers in the wind, carried through the ages. The tea house closes for the night. Until tomorrow.